Hello, and welcome back to the Unfounded Podcast, everyone. Thank you for joining me here. And today we're doing another podcast episode live here on TikTok. So for anybody that's been following the podcast up until this point, just on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, whatever you find it on, I'd recommend finding me out here on TikTok. My name's Chris the Sage on TikTok. That's spelled with a THA in the middle. And I do these live episodes every once in a while where you can kind of interact and write some comments based on what I'm saying, be a little more interactive throughout the episode, and be with me while it's being recorded. So if that sounds interesting to you, if you've been listening for a couple of years and wanted to be a part of the conversation, maybe, check me out on TikTok. There's some other things that I'm developing as well that I've talked about in other episodes that will be coming out soon, and I'll keep you updated as we do. That being said, that's not why we're here today. This is going to be an interesting episode. It might be a little bit more long form. It's harkening back to episodes I'd done a couple years back in the podcast, more research-based things, curiosity, adventure-based things, right? And the topic that we're focusing on today is kind of the development of the secular world view, right? The way that we view the world today, right, in mass. This being based off of kind of the scientific method, this very logical and reasoning way of interfacing with the world. And because of how prevalent it is, it makes us feel as modern humans that this is the only way we've thought about the world up until this point, or that the only way to place the scientific worldview into context in relation with the spiritual world is to choose one, right? You have to pick a side, kind of a thing. Either you believe in science or you believe in your religion of choice. I believe this is kind of a false choice that we're given. I believe these, like everything in the world, everything's part of a certain type of evolution, so that different ways of thinking about the world are not disconnected from each other. They actually inform other worldviews, and oftentimes one worldview will develop out as a response to another one, which is what I believe happened with kind of the secular worldview. It was a response, just kind of as a hypothesis before we do more research, a response to the prevalence of spirituality in the world for all of human history, the problems that inherently produced in moving the civilization forward. So it's almost like a critique of the bad parts of the spiritual world up until that point. This is my hypothesis, at least. The thing that I'm going to be trying to look for is the figures that were significant. We read about often in our history books. They're often told to us, figures like Einstein, figures like Newton, all of these more secular figures, secular leaders of sorts are usually described as such, very non-spiritual beings, very logical and rational beings. But what I've found, thank you, Josh, man, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for that. I appreciate. This is what I do, guys. So this is my full job now. So if you do have the means to donate or to support the podcast in any way, it really does help support me. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So that being said, I want to look more specifically at the figures because, at least from my experience up until this point, I have found that many of those figures like Tesla is a very good example, while they produced massive leaps forward in the scientific community in terms of research, the way they came about that information, more often than not, was a very non-traditional means, a very almost spiritual means. So that's my hypothesis to start out with, and we're gonna be doing some research to see if there's anything that backs that up, actually. I have an interesting book here, a couple interesting books. I'm going to start off the podcast like we usually do with some sayings from my Buddha book here to kind of guide us. And then I do have some tarot cards here. If I feel called at any point throughout the podcast, I'll pull one for context. But I also have this really interesting book called The Secret Teachings of All Ages right here. It's by Manly P. Hall. It's a huge book, right? It's a massive book. And it has really interesting, more esoteric historical teachings throughout history, all in one place. And so I was looking through this before I came on here, and I found a section on alchemy and its exponents and kind of a description of that practice. And this is where I kind of want to start, is in alchemy and kind of reading a little bit more about the practice, because I don't think it's well defined in the modern day or the modern world. And understanding what alchemy is gives us more of insight into how science became a thing. Right, and the transition that we took from spirituality to science is much more gradual than we like to think of in the modern day. So That being said, we're going to read a little bit from this, and then we'll just go down some rabbit holes, see what we can find, to look up some figures. So, thank you for being here, guys. I appreciate you. And let's start it off with the Buddha book. Like I said, this is I've read from this quite a bit for those of you that are followers of the podcast. This is Sayings of the Buddha, Reflections for Every Day by William Wray. I had to look at it because it's backwards in the camera. And the way I do this on podcasts is I'll just intuitively pull a page, right? So I'm obviously not looking at the page. I'll just flip to whatever opens, basically. And it's always relevant in some way. Maybe sometimes not in the moment. A lot of times it's retrospective after I listen back to the podcast. Anyway, hope that you get something out of it. Today's messages are: to try and understand one's inner mind, still chained to hopes and fears, that prolongs the bondage. To try and understand one's inner mind, still chained to hopes and fears, that prolongs the bondage. This is a tough lesson to learn, one that I've learned over and over again throughout my life. There is this idea of hope that we cling to. And what's interesting about it is we view it as a positive thing. And I do think there's a reason for that, right? It can inspire positive things in the world. But I think in the way that this passage is a Buddhist book, obviously. This passage speaks of it. It's more of in a dualistic way. That if we focus on hopes and fears, what we're focusing on is everything but now, right? We're focusing on everything around us, the ways that the world is changing or the ways that the world could change, right? And this is inherently fearful because it represents a lack of control that we innately have over the world. And because of that, that fear, we will tell ourselves stories about the ways we actually can control the world in order to protect the thing that needs to go away, our ego, right? Our conception of the world that's broken, whatever it is. So in that, it prolongs the bondage, your bondage to an idea that isn't you, right? And this is, in a very tangential way related kind of to what I'm talking about. Our conceptions of the world shape the world that we see. If you don't believe something exists, it doesn't. You won't allow it to, right? You won't allow your vision to see it if you don't believe it. So this is part of the problem in trying to explain the secular perspective and the religious perspective to each other, is because they're doing it from different levels of reality, right? It's not about higher or lower. They're looking at the world from a different perspective, literally, so that both are true. But in order to recognize the total truth and release yourself from the bondage that you need to argue against this other perspective, you have to recognize the parts of your truth that aren't that, right? And release that. It will hold you down. It'll make you into a nasty thing eventually. Untruth does that inherently. It slowly rots the individual, right? Very slowly, until you're not the thing you thought you were before. And that's a certain type of prison, hell, however you want to describe it. But it's something that we do to ourselves, right? We all do this to ourselves. And so this is why the curiosity of the human mind is a divine quality. Because it can overwhelm these feelings of fear if you allow it to, right? The adventurous spirit, that's why the Fool card is the first in the tarot, right? In order to start any adventure, you have to have the courage to step off a ledge that you don't know there's a bottom to, right? And conceptually, that can be just ideas, right? And you'll notice this when you have a certain idea that you're really ideologically bound to. Because as you start to question that idea, it will feel like you're questioning, if you've raised it too high, God, right? The total truth. And in this way, this is actually one of the ways we unintentionally raise ideas that are not divine to a divine place internally. And we actually unintentionally worship those ideas. This is a process that is happening very readily right now, especially in politics, right? So powerful message to start off there, right? But I'm interested to see how it becomes relevant as we continue down researching today. The page right before that, I haven't read this one yet, but we'll see if it's relevant, because I usually read both. 130. If an eye never falls asleep, all dreams will by themselves cease. So this also speaks of control. This speaks of feeling like we have a job or a role to define the world. In order for us to be safe in it, we have to figure out every aspect of it, right? This is, I do believe, one of the untruths in the secular worldview. It's one of the things that degrades it naturally if it's not balanced, is this ability to think that we can see the entire universe and understand all of it at once. Right? There's a certain type of hubris in that leads you to a certain type of despair, because you'll make yourself unintentionally, slowly, into something that could see everything. God. It's the only thing that can do that conceptually, right? Even if you don't agree that there's a God sitting on a cloud, conceptually, the only thing that could see everything at once would be a God, right? So as soon as you start to think that way, as soon as you start to view the world as if it's something that you can solve completely, you've raised yourself to a place that's kind of dangerous, if that makes sense, right? And in this, you can see this in this passage. If an eye never falls asleep, all dreams will by themselves cease. So what that means there is, as we start to define the world and try to hold it together in the way that we're seeing it, we completely forfeit the ability to reshape it, right? Dreams are what shapes the world, what creates newness, novelty in it, and what drives it forward, right? I have a dream, the speech that Martin Luther King gave, right? This is this is so significant. I'm getting chills, actually, because this is exactly the point that I was feeling as I thought about this subject. The way, and this is, again, just a hypothesis, we'll find out today, but the way that I've come to understand newness comes into the world, right? New ideas, really crazy ideas that shake and change the world. The way that happens every time is through a dream. Or a dream-like experience. And like I said, we'll go through trying to describe some of these today specifically. But what that says to me is that there's a process going on in the secular world, in the gestation of the secular world, that was divine by nature, that was unexplainable by nature, that was ignored because the basis of the developing ideology was we can define everything. So it started to form as an enemy against ideas that would let go of that very specific type of control, right? Because it's antithetical to the worldview, right? So this is, I think, what's happened slowly over time. So we've taken out the spiritual qualities of every significant secular figure in history. We've deleted them by the way we've told the stories, as if they logicked their way to this kind of novelty. It doesn't happen that way. And one of the ways we can recognize that is the people like Newton that had the idea for gravity. He was basing his understanding of the world off of things that we now know are not true. Right? Everything he had been taught up until that point, at least maybe not everything, but a substantial part of the way that the world was structured, the way it was defined, was incorrect. That was the schools he went to. That was the knowledge he was taught. And the way that he got to the novelty, the idea of gravity, was by sitting under a tree and having an apple hit his head. Right? There's nothing logical about that process. There's nothing he did to make that happen. Right? There was insight. The action itself of the apple dropping on the head is figurative itself. It's descriptive in the image, right? Of the way insight comes into being. It's delivered to you. You don't make it, right? And this is the theory we'll see if there's any thereabout. So again, this is what I feel, but research is important. So that was an interesting way to start off the pod. Thank you, everyone that's joining here. Thank you, Frankie, for being here, listening at work. Awesome. Yeah, if anybody, that's kind of what I like to do when I'm listening to podcasts, right, is to turn it on while I'm walking or cleaning or at work or whatever, and you'll find that you lose track of time. You know, you go into that dream state somewhat, and that's the state through which real insight comes to you, right? So let's start this off with a little bit of reading from The Secret Teachings of All Ages. So, real briefly, I'm going to kind of set up at least my understanding of history. up until this point, right? So we're reading about alchemy here, right? But alchemy, from what I understand, developed out of it'll describe it here. It developed in a world where the spiritual world was the status quo, right? So every society had a certain spiritual basis that was so deeply ingrained into the society that what formed the power structure of it, right? So it would define the way the society developed. Out of that grew this interest in human beings' ability to create novelty, to discover new things about the world, and to actually leverage the world in certain ways that can help the human being. This is a very scientific way of looking at the world, right? But it developed out of alchemy. And alchemy has this, the reason you'll hear it used in almost like what's the best way to describe it? We have a misunderstanding of what it is because it has a magic quality to it. When you say alchemy, when you think about it, you'll think it has a certain type of magic to it. That's what differentiates it from science in your head usually, right? So what is that? What was that quality in alchemy that was magic, right? Matter of fact, from what I understand, most of the significant figures in history that were around in this time called themselves alchemists at that time, right? Came from this tradition. Figures like Da Vinci, right? Figures like Newton. They were trained in this area, this subject area. So the secular worldview, the scientific worldview, I believe, developed out of that. And almost from what I can see right now, what differentiates the two is the lack of the magic. It's the only difference, right? That the scientific worldview, the secular worldview, what differentiates it from alchemy is it deleted the magic part and said it's all rational. We create the magic through rationality, right? Through learning more about the world, through discovering it and organizing it, then we can leverage it and make magic, right? But in that process, in making it linear and making it something that's totally controllable, you automatically delete the idea of magic, the idea of co-creation, the idea that there's something bigger that has other things going on that are more important than you figuring out how to call everything, right? Or how to label it all. So there's a certain hubris in the way that this developed out of alchemy. That's par for the course for human beings. This is partially how we develop. It's not right or wrong. It's just an evolution, right? So let's read a little bit about alchemy and its exponents. All right. This is on page 480. Again, this is, and I'll when I post it on the podcast, I'll post references and stuff, guys. So if you want to come back and look at any of these books or buy them yourself, go onto the podcast website, and it's always in the show notes and the show descriptions. You can click on the links there. So I'll usually, if I don't have a link, I'll usually put a link to like Amazon or something where you can actually purchase the book and find it. So, all right, this is on page 480, and this is Alchemy and its Exponents. Is the transmutation of base metals into gold possible? Is the idea one at which the learned of the learned of the modern world can afford to scold? Excuse me, guys, I'm stumbling over my words to begin here. Alchemy was more than a speculative art. It was also an operative art. Since the time of the immortal Hermes, alchemists have asserted, and not without substantiating evidence, that they could manufacture gold from tin, silver, lead, and mercury. That the galaxy of brilliant philosophic and scientific minds who, over a period of 2,000 years, affirmed the actuality of metallic transmutation and multiplication could be completely sane and rational in all other problems of philosophy and science, yet hopelessly mistaken on this one point, is untenable. Nor is it reasonable that the hundreds declaring to have seen and performed transmutations of metals could all have been duped, imbeciles or liars. Those assuming that all alchemists were of sound mentality would be forced to put in this category nearly all the philosophers and scientists of the ancient and medieval worlds. Emperors, princes, priests, and common townsfolk have witnessed the apparent miracle of metallic metamorphosis. In the face of existing testimony, anyone is privileged to remain unconvinced, but the scoffer elects to ignore evidence worthy of respectful conversation. Many great alchemists and hermetic philosophers occupy an honored niche in the Hall of Fame, while their multitudinous critics, multitudinous, I can't pronounce that, critics remain obscure. To list all these sincere seekers after nature's great arcanum is impossible, but a few will suffice to acquaint the reader with the superior types of intellect who interested themselves in this abstruse subject. Among the more prominent names are those of Thomas Norton, Isaac of Holland, Basil Valentine, the supposed discoverer of antimony, Jean de Meung, Roger Bacon, Albertus Magnus, Cursenius Gerber, the Arabian, who brought the knowledge of alchemy to Europe through his writings, Paracelsus, Nicholas Flamel, John Frederick Helvetius, Raymond Lully, Alexander Sethin, Michael Sendivogius, Count Bernard of Treviso, Sir George Ripley, Picus de Mirandola, John Dee, Henry Coonrath, Michael Mayer, Thomas Vaughan, J.B. von Helmont, John Hayden, Lascarius, Thomas Charnac, Cincius, Bishop of Ptolemy, Morio, excuse me for all of these mispronounced names, guys. These are a lot of names from around the world that are hard to pronounce. The Comte di Cagliostro and the Comte de Saint-Germain. There are legends to the effect that King Solomon and Pythagoras were alchemists, and that the former manufactured by alchemical means the gold used in his temple. Albert Pike takes sides with the alchemical philosopher by declaring that the gold of the Hermeticists was a reality. He says the Hermetic science, like all the real sciences, is mathematically demonstrable. Its results, even material, are as rigorous as that of a correct equation. The Hermetic gold is not only a true dogma, a light without shadow, a truth without alloy, a falsehood. It is also a material gold, real, pure, the most precious that can be found in the mines of the earth. So much for the Masonic angle. William and Mary jointly ascended the throne of England in 1689, at which time alchemists must have abounded in the kingdom. For during the first year of their reign, they repealed an act made by King Henry IV, in which that sovereign declared the multiplying of metals to be a crime against the crown. In Dr. Sigmund Backstrom's collection of alchemical manuscripts is a handwritten copy of the act passed by William and Mary, copied from Chapter 30 of Statutes at Large for the first year of their reign. The act reads as follows: An act to repeal the statute made in the 5th year of King Henry IV, late King of England, wherein it was enacted, among other things, in these words, or to this effect, namely, that none from henceforth should use to multiply gold or silver, or use the craft of multiplication, and if any the same do, they shall incur the pain of felony. And whereas, since the making of the said statute, divers persons have been melting and refining of metals, and otherwise improving and multiplying them and their ores, which very much abound in this realm, and extracting gold and silver out of the same, but dare not to exercise their said skill within this realm, for fear of falling under the penalty of the said statute, but exercise the said art in foreign parts, to the great loss and detriment of this realm. Be it therefore enacted by the kings and queens' most excellent majesties, by and with the advice and consent of the lords spiritual and temporal and commons in this present parliament assembled, that from henceforth the aforesaid branch, article, or sentence contained in the said act, and every word, matter, and thing contained in the said branch or sentence shall be repealed, annulled, revoked, forever made void, anything in the said act to the contrary in any wise whatsoever notwithstanding, provided always, and be it enacted by the authority aforesaid, that all the gold and silver that shall be extracted by the aforesaid art of melting or refining of metals, and otherwise improving and multiplying of them and their ores, as before set forth, be from henceforth employed for no other use or uses whatsoever but for the increase of monies, and that the place hereby appointed for the disposal thereof shall be their Majesties' mint within the Tower of London, at which place they are to receive the full and true value of their gold and silver so procured from time to time, according to the assay and fineness thereof, and so for any greatness or less weight, and that none of the metal of gold and silver so refined and procured be permitted to be used or disposed of in any other place or places within their Majesties' dominions. It's a mouthful, huh? After this repealing measure had been effected, William and Mary encouraged the further study of alchemy. So that gives you a little bit of insight here, guys, a little bit of a description of, at least historically, what made alchemy such a hot topic, right? You may ask why anybody would, on the surface, it kind of sounds silly. Why would anybody care that people could, take coal and turn it into gold, right? Well, again, it seems kind of silly on the surface, but when you start to think about it at any depth, you'll notice, especially with the proclamations here, and if you have any understanding about how monetary systems work, the ability to print money is essentially the ability to control an economy, right? We know this modern day. That's why we have a U.S. mint, and that's why, in order to control our economy, one of the ways we do that is by increasing interest rates, decreasing interest rates, or printing money, right? So this was also true in this time frame, right? Except money was different back then, right? We didn't have paper money. All we had was gold and silver. So this was the basis of the monetary system. And because gold and silver is very hard to procure, it attained the value that it has in the ancient world and today, right? Because of its rarity. Now imagine if it wasn't rare anymore, right? What that would do to the medieval economy. So this essentially was a nuclear bomb that would go off inside the medieval world economically if people were able to print their own money, which is why it was declared to be illegal, right? But then also, and this is where you find that out, where it's revealing in reading that whole section, that was repealed, right? The ban on alchemy after Henry IV. But the reason they did it when they did it is because they had figured out a way to not affect the economy, right? It describes it here. You can practice alchemy, you can change gold or other metals into gold, but you have to come here, where was it? You have to come to the majesties, to the tax collectors, essentially, where we weigh it. We define how much value it has, and then we'll exchange that reproduced gold for the real stuff, our stuff, the stamped money, right? So in that way, you control the population from overinflating or deflating the money, right? So there's your motivation. One of the motivations for why alchemy may have gotten a bad name throughout history, right? The same reason most things get a bad name, even modern day. Money. When you affect people's pocketbooks, the way they react is by trying to defame you, right? They try to take you out. And this is true at the individual level. It's also true at the group level, at the idea level, right? So as new discoveries come into being, they're not celebrated. That's what we like to think about. We like to think that we celebrate all these new developments. We don't. We criticize them because they threaten the world that we've already created, right? And more often than not, they directly threaten the people that established the world that we have right now, that have the most direct control. Not that we know who those people are, but logically we know they exist, right? So there's all of these assumptions that we can get to logically if we have a deeper understanding of where alchemy came from, right? I'm going to read on a little bit further and just finish out this section, and we'll go into some more research. Thanks for being here, guys. I appreciate you. Dr. Franz Hartmann has collected reliable evidence concerning 4 different alchemists who transmuted base materials into gold, not once, but many times. One of these accounts concerns a monk of the order of St. Augustine named Wenzel Seiler, who discovered a small amount of mysterious red powder in his convent, in the presence of Emperor Leopold I, King of Germany, Hungary, and Bohemia. He transmuted quantities of tin into gold. Among other things, he dipped into this mysterious essence was a oh wow. Ooh, big ringing in my ears. I just got hit on the side of this head with ringing. That's interesting. If anybody experiences that, ringing in the ears that comes on very abruptly, different pitches, low pitch and high pitch, I'm trying to figure out exactly what that is, because it's in many cases a representation of, from what I understand, you turning on, awakening, you activating different parts of your perception that haven't been activated before, right? But also, I don't know exactly how to approach the subject right now, so I'm just going to kind of leave it there. But there's other things going on in this world that would cause that kind of symptom in people. I'll just leave it there. Ringing in the ears. And it's becoming more common. And if anybody's familiar with certain there's been certain developments in terms of diseases over the last 10 years, very recently, that many people, especially people throughout the government agencies, military, and spy agencies have been experiencing. What I speak of is a very specific type of weapons platform that's been developed but hasn't been covered, hasn't been described to people. The reason I talk about this is I've also been in the military. I know that the technology exists. Not that I've worked with that kind of technology, but I've worked on security systems, microwave security system technology that's been around since the 80s or the 70s, where you essentially set up boundaries or perimeters based on microwave detection devices. One of the things that happens, as you can imagine with microwaves, it has the ability with those systems to be targeted, to be pointed, right? I'm going to leave it at that. That was in the 70s. Imagine what modern day we would be able to create in terms of weaponry in that instance. Again, and I'll leave it at that because I don't want to be conspiratorial, but I am right now trying to understand exactly the relation between ringing in the ears and the other symptoms that come along with ringing in the ears, more often than not, the spiritual awakening process, and modern weaponry that is being and has been developed. So anyway, kind of a tangent there, but I felt called to say that for anybody that's listening. If you're interested in the ringing in the ears, I'd recommend doing more research into it, because it is, at the very least, a signifier that you are tuning in moving frequencies as a human being, and that you're hearing that change in an auditory way. The most indisputable proof, if appearances can prove anything, of the possibility of transmuting base metals into gold may be seen by everyone who visits Vienna. It being a metal preserved in the imperial treasury chamber, and is stated that this metal, consisting originally of silver, has been partly transformed into gold by alchemical means by the same Wenzel Sailor, who was afterwards made a knight by the Emperor Leopold I and given the title Wenceslaus Ritter von Rheinberg, in the pronaos of the Temple of Wisdom. That's what that means. Space limitations preclude a lengthy discussion of the alchemist. A brief sketch of the lives of four should serve to show the general principles on which they worked, the method by which they obtained their knowledge, and the use which they made of it. These four were grand masters of this secret science, and the stories of their wanderings and strivings, as recorded by their own pens and by contemporaneous disciples of the Hermetic art, are as fascinating as any romance fiction. Again, that comes from page 482, 483 of The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. And you can find that book at Barnes & Noble or wherever you go to get your books, I'm sure on Amazon. So that kind of sets us up a little bit, gives us a base understanding of, at least historically, how alchemy has been significant. Now, that's not the only way that you'll find, or the only context in which you'll hear the term alchemy come up, right? There's also a form of spiritual alchemy that you will engage with as you go through the awakening process in spirituality. What this speaks of is a very similar process of transmutation that you see with the metals here, right? Taking one metal and transmuting it into something more valuable. But that same process is the process that happens internally and spiritually, which is partially why I believe there was a magic quality to alchemy as it developed physically, because it was representing something fundamentally true, a process that takes place inside of the human being, right? Not only externally. In order to understand the process, we externalize it. We have to see it. You can take something that's objectively less valuable and make it into something more valuable through what? Through your belief. That's the truth of alchemy, right? And that's the spiritual truth of alchemy, that when you apply it to yourself, you will start to raise your vibration, and it'll start to outline exactly what parts of you are keeping you in the vibration you're in. So there's this changing of metals into gold, whether that's literal or figurative, that is true, but it's something that we've lost, right? Which is interesting, because if you look into the scientific world, there's this idea that fixed things don't change, right? The fundamental constants is the best example I could point out for this. Anybody that is privy to the sciences, right, studies them in any way or works in the sciences, will recognize that you base all calculation in science off of fundamental constants. There's actually a book that's reproduced. I can't remember exactly how often. It's like every decade or maybe even more often than that, but if you went through college, you're handed a little pamphlet. And this is handed to everybody around the world during the period of time when we're doing research, right? So that we can have the same constant numbers to base our calculations off of, right? So things like the gravitational constant, right? I can't think of all of them at this period of time, but there's also all of these constants that we use in physics to base calculation off of. The interesting thing about that is those constants aren't constant, exemplified by they have to be refined every 10 years. So you'd assume if we did research into something, we're trying to find the constant parts of the universe, right? When you found them, you wouldn't have to find them again because they're constant, right? You just write them down and pass them to people. But what we see is not that happening. What we see is an editing every decade or so of what the constant is in science. The constants are in science, right? Which sometimes can be drastically different in relation to the calculations they produce, which to me is a screaming red flag that we've gotten something wrong in that, right? That if we assume that which it means if the constants are wrong, the calculations that make up all of this assumption doesn't mean they're wrong, but it means they're based on that assumption. So that part of the universe, when you assume that, that's what it looks like. That's what that means. But it's so confined to a very specific quality of the universe that you'll never find the rest of it looking that way, which is why inside of the secular worldview, there's this very constrained way of looking at it. You have to agree with these things. You have to see the world this way. This is also true in spirituality, but it's just a different way of doing it, right? This is why science has become a religion. One of the reasons, because we act it out the same way. And this is, again, just my opinion, but it's fascinating to me how deeply spiritual a human being is fundamentally. We produce that, right? You don't see cats and dogs and birds coming together and singing and dancing and for a purpose of celebrating what they're experiencing. Like, that's a human quality. And there's divinity in that, right? The tendency to want to come together like that, to share in the experience without gestating pain, right? That's a certain type of heaven. That's a certain type of divinity that I believe makes up a basis of most of spiritual practice practically throughout the world, which is something that's also missed. But it's something that's fundamental in the human being. So even if you decide, hey, I don't want to follow this religion or that religion, that's fine. You still have to believe in something. It's not a choice. You're going to believe in something, right? So you choose what you believe in. If it's not that, what is it, right? If you don't like that you have to define what it is now, well, it's your job, right? You said you don't believe what everybody else has agreed to up until this point. That's okay. What is the truth then? And I think that's what's been happening over the last 100 years. This is our version of it. This is what the world actually is, right? Take out all of this foo-foo stuff. Take out all of this magic stuff. It's dangerous. It creates chaos in communities and people. Instead, look at the world this way, linearly. Time, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's predictable. I can make safety for you in that. I can make predictability and constant progress, right? Don't you want that? That kind of stability and certainty is something that is innately anti-human because it's unnatural. There's no other being in this world, in this universe that we know of, that knows the future like that, right? I find it funny that unintentionally the scientific method attempts to do that, right? So, let's see what else we can find. I was thinking about Newton a lot today, and I wanted to read a little bit more about him, Isaac Newton. So he's a figure that's coming through right now. But figures like Tesla, Newton, Da Vinci, all of these are very close energetically right now. I can feel them, right? And there's this message they've been trying to bring through for a very long time. And it's this, that we've been misrepresented, right? We were not these robots of logic and reason, right? We were logical, reasoning, brilliant men. But we were not the thing that we were made out to be. We believed in something. That's why we did it. Right? I can hear this Nice to meet you too. Affirmations. I appreciate that. And I've heard it for a long time. What's interesting is, that may sound crazy to some people. That's anti-scientific, the way I'm postulating this thesis, right? I'm not going about it with that rational mind in priority. I'm going about it with the feeling part of me, the intuitive part of me as a priority. And what that leads me to is this, right? A certain type of truth that you'll miss if you're trying to logic your way through it, right? It's just, you just won't see it. But it's kind of obvious. Don't you want to believe in something? Don't you believe in something? Right? Even if you say you don't, what do you follow? What rules lead you to that assumption? That is your religion. That is your belief, right? To try to make these figures into something that wasn't that didn't have that part of them, is anti-human, is robotic, right? Which then gives a false idol for us to live up to. Which is also partially why I believe that the scientific world is something that people have a hard time connecting with, because it's unemotional. And I find it kind of comical, but like you'll see a bunch of different scientists and physicists in different fields get really excited, especially on TikTok, over like goofy things. Really excited, and I almost watch it, and I'm not trying to make fun by any means, but like, for instance, there was this big discovery not too long ago about, I can't even remember what it was because it's something very specific, scientific, right? It was like we figured out the differentiation between a black hole's mass and it's whatever it is, right? It's something very, very specific. And there was like a lead up, how when we have a huge announcement to make, people will be like, we found something out, like the UFO thing, like we found something out, just wait, you're going to hear everything. It's like, I saw a bunch of physicists doing this before this release of information of what they figured out, right? And then they released the information and it was this kind of underwhelming thing, right? Like, what does that even mean? Yes, you figured out what that specific quantity is. Yes. Why should I be excited about it? How does it affect my life? How does that make it better, right? By saying we know exactly how big this is now. There's no relation to making my life better. I love the research. I love the adventure of it in just seeing the universe that makes up everything around us. But I do think that most of the scientific exploration for the last 60 or 70 years has basically been that, a gawking at our ability to measure shit as if it's actually discovering something new, right? When's the last time we had a truly significant technology burst onto the scene? The internet, right? That one advancement. Electricity, internet. You can call it telephone, but it's all communication, right? You got electricity and then it enabled us to communicate. That one explosion into our civilization is what created everything you see right now, right? In terms of technological advancement. But in terms of understanding the universe more fully, it's led us no closer. Matter of fact, I think it's led us further away. Because those fundamental truths, like the ones that were just described here, that alchemical process that goes on inside of human beings that makes them better people, makes them more true versions of themselves, is not represented. So that people don't know that's something they should try to be, right? And that's a problem, right? The dangerous part, and I'm not trying to be too critical, right, again, of the secular worldview, but this is why it's dangerous and why I say it, because there's nothing wrong with people believing whatever they believe, but we have to understand that that's what you're doing, right? You can pretend like, no, I know this is a fact. Okay, that's how belief feels. That is belief. Do you understand that? Right? Just because you looked through a telescope, saw a number based on a laser that you shot at it, whatever, yes, you can see that. You believe that's true because of your experience. You call that fact, and then you differentiate that from everybody else's version of it, as if that's somehow higher. Your fact is higher than other people's belief. It's the same fucking thing. You just don't want to admit that, right? That's why it's dangerous. Because you will unintentionally go and try to deconstruct other people's lived experience in this world. And that's what's been going on, make no mistake about it, for the last 100 years, is a all-out attack, assault on your ability to see your spiritual side, your ability to develop in any other way besides the way I tell you the world looks. Right? And there is something that's deeply sad about that. But again, it's not something, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to blame people. This is easy to fall into, right? If you don't know you're a fundamentally spiritual being, you'll delete that part and go about acting as if you aren't. But you still are. So you'll still act out those spiritual principles, even though you're not recognizing them. But the way you'll act them out when you're not recognizing them is in the negative way, because you're denying them. So a matter of fact, you'll go about the world testing all of those fundamental things in the negative way, trying to disprove them. I'm not a spiritual thing. I can do what I want. You say I can't do this? Watch me. I can. It's never been a matter of you can't do this. Of course you can. You can do whatever you want. Do you want to, is the question. If you don't know the answer to that question, that's how you find out. Go test it. Millions upon millions of people throughout history have tested what works in this world in that way and what doesn't. It's the most scientific process I can imagine. Repetitive, over and over again. What works in your life? What doesn't? What works in your life? What doesn't? What works in your life? What doesn't? That's what establishes these spiritual fundamentals, right? Things that you cannot deny that are true. So that if you are denying them, test them. One of the only criticisms, and this is an odd thing to say, a very odd thing to say, and I don't mean this in an egotistical way, but it's something that I haven't been able to square in my understanding of Christianity, because I believe in all of the religions as a certain part of the truth, right? One of the parts of Christianity that I often debate and question is a part of the Old Testament. It is the Ten Commandments. Because, in a very mirrored way, to demonstrate the logical and rational side has value, when you approach the Ten Commandments from a logical and rational side, a practical side, and ask yourself, why would somebody make those rules? You'll come to a really, really disconcerting realization, especially if you're a parent. You know this is true, and I'll explain it here. If your kid starts doing something wrong, and you know it's wrong, what happens if you tell them not to do it? Do they stop? Very, and you can feel this. There's a possibility they could. But more often than not, if you ask yourself that question, no. It inspires inside of you a questioning. Prove it. Right? So then I ask you, why would you create, if you're God, if you're omniscient, if you know everything and the best way to go about it, why would you make 10 rules that people need to stay away from, that people need to watch out for, right? Why would you tell them not to do these things? How are they going to react? Logically, the same way. They're going to test them. They're going to break them because you set them up. They wouldn't have thought about those things before describing them, right? So what I'm trying to say here is a more practical means of going about showing truth to people is to describe the consequences of actions. That's the way you do it. So instead of do not kill, you describe what happens to you if you kill someone. If you kill someone, this is the feeling that you will be in, this is the hell you will be thrown into. You will feel these emotions, you will punish yourself in these ways, and you'll fall into this version of hell in the world. That's why you shouldn't kill people. But instead we said don't kill them. Right? So again, this is not me criticizing God in that sense. This is me asking those fundamental questions and demonstrating that this is why logic and reason exists, because it's part of the truth. You know, in the same way that science doesn't look at itself critically, neither does religion. Right? These are true on both sides, and we need to apply the value of each side of that perspective on the opposite, right? Bring that belief-based way of looking at the world into the secular world and combine it with this logic and reason so that we can actually find the truth, right, in the world. So we can help ourselves, so we can even describe what we're feeling, right? And be able to relate to it. This is why I wanted to talk about the secular world, right? Because you deserve to feel empowered in your, what am I trying to say here? You deserve to not, It's a shame that belief, what people believe in, has been shamed. That is the shame, right? Regardless of what you believe in. And that's the process that I think we're working on right now. One of the processes that we're working on right now as a collective is recognizing all of our individual value, regardless of what we believe, that there's truth in your perspective. And we do not get to the larger truth by denying other people's version of it, right? We just enunciate what we feel and what we see. Sometimes that can be aggressive even, right? But in that, you'll recognize the untruth, right? Letting yourself go, letting yourself really feel who you are, right? If you've never snapped, you don't know who you are. Truly. There's this beautiful quote that I went over in Nietzsche's Human, All Too Human. This is another thing that I do often, guys. I don't know if we'll go live tonight, but I'll post if I do. I do a book club where we do philosophy, right? And I was reading in Nietzsche Human, All Too Human about this not too long ago, a couple nights ago, and I want to see if I can find it here. This seems relevant for some reason, so I'm going to read this. This is from Nietzsche, Human, All Too Human, page 61. This is section 81. This is a paragraph. Misunderstanding between the sufferer and the perpetrator. When a rich man takes a possession from a poor man, for example, when a prince robs a plebeian of his sweetheart, the poor man misunderstands. He thinks that the rich man must be a villain, to take from him the little he has. But the rich man does not feel the value of a particular possession so deeply, because he is accustomed to having many. So he cannot put himself in the place of the poor man, and he is by no means doing a great injustice, as the poor man believes. Each has a false idea of the other. The injustice of the mighty, which enrages us most in history, is by no means as great as it appears. Simply the inherited feeling of being a higher being, with higher pretensions, makes one rather cold, and leaves the conscience at peace. Indeed, none of us feels anything like injustice when there is a great difference between ourselves and some other being, and we kill a gnat, for example, without any twinge of conscience. So it is no sign of wickedness in Xerxes, whom even all the Greeks portray as exceptionally noble, when he takes a son from his father and has him cut to pieces, because the father had expressed an anxious and doubtful distrust of their entire campaign. In this case, the individual man is eliminated like an unpleasant insect. He stands too low to be allowed to keep an arousing, bothersome feeling in the world ruler. Indeed, no cruel idea of pain is not the same. Indeed, no cruel man is cruel to the extent that the mistreated man believes, and man, is that a powerful message. The idea of pain is not the same as the suffering of it. It is the same with an unjust judge. It is the same with an unjust judge. With a journalist who misleads public opinion by little dishonesties. My God, the relevance in this to what's going on around us modern day. In each of these cases, cause and effect are experienced in quite different categories of thought and feeling. Nevertheless, it is automatically assumed that the perpetrator and sufferer think and feel the same, and the guilt of the one is therefore measured by the pain of the other. So, I don't know why I felt compelled to read that, but it demonstrates and speaks of this difference in the way we can see the world. And this is more specifically related. Sure, absolutely. Random. Here's the book right here. It's Human, All Too Human by Nietzsche. Now, before, that's a very tame part of the book. Right. I can read you a section just before that that's darker. Actually, I will, just so you know what you're getting into if you do read Nietzsche, right? Because Nietzsche is somebody that there's some of the ideas he plays with are dangerous. And if you're engaging with them, you need to be ready for that, because they can do something to your psyche if we're not ready for it. So I'm going to read just before that what he was talking about. But I do recommend Nietzsche. He's my favorite because of that, because he relies on only truth. Right, radically so, to where he isolated himself most of his life because of it, and was, went out as a crazy man, like most great thinkers do in the end. So let's read this. This is called, and again, any of you that are not ready for kind of a hard thought experiment. Maybe take a pause on this for 5 minutes and come back, okay? This is on page 60, right before that, paragraph 80. The old man and death. One may well ask why, aside from the demands of religion, it is more praiseworthy for a man grown old who feels his powers decrease to await his slow exhaustion and disintegration rather than to put a term to his life with complete consciousness. In this case, suicide is quite natural, obvious, and should by rights awaken respect for the triumph of reason. This it did in those times when the leading Greek philosophers and the doughtiest Roman patriots used to die by suicide. Conversely, the compulsion to prolong life from day to day, anxiously consulting doctors and accepting the most painful, humiliating conditions without the strength to come near the actual goal of one's life. This is far less worthy of respect. Religions provide abundant excuses to escape the need to kill oneself. This is how they insulate themselves from those who are in love with life. Okay. So, that being said, and that is not an end you should come to. That is a thought experiment, right? If you find yourself agreeing with what he's saying completely, I'm here to tell you that that's not the right way to be thinking. Not that there's a right way to be thinking. You're in that place for a reason, but that's not the only place you'll ever be. You're actually in the pit, in the darkness, at exactly the time you're supposed to be, right? There's insight that comes out of those dark places. That's why he's brave for saying what he just said. It doesn't mean you stay there, right? It means you go into a place that before that you were too scared to even look at. I won't even ask that fucking question. Why? Because I think it actually makes me a bad thing to think it. Right? So we don't allow ourselves to go there. That's what Nietzsche will do. He'll go there and he will ask the question that is so radical, it'll make you think he's a bad thing. Right? But that's truth. That's the extent to which truth can expand inside of you, if you're ready for that. So I read that as a caution, honestly, to Nietzsche. Not that you shouldn't engage with it, but that be ready for it. Because he can, if you're not ready for that material, it can throw you out of balance, right? And that's the last thing I want for people. It's why I'm reading it here in a group setting, so that every section we can stop, pull it apart, and really figure out what it means. Because when you're doing it by yourself, especially imagine reading that section by yourself while you're depressed, right? It's not a place you want to be. So these things I think are meant to be digested together. Right, in a group setting like this, where we can all figure out exactly what it means to us individually and recognize that we're all scared. That's a scary fucking paragraph, right? And that's okay. That's okay. I mean, those questions we need to ask. And just because we ask them, it doesn't mean we're going to go to a bad place, right? It means we will finally have the courage to figure out where this nastiness is coming from inside of us and in the world, right? So... for some reason, Xerxes is coming through too, because the last couple days. So anybody that watched 300, that movie's been coming through quite a bit as well. But he speaks of it in that first passage I read. If you've watched 300, I found this struck me about 300 too. When I watched it, was something about a respect that I felt in the movie theater, and you could see even. Leonidas had for the figure of Xerxes, even though he was something that was so obviously egotistical that he thought he confused himself with a god. There was something about the way he interacted with Xerxes. He didn't, and the way Xerxes interacted with Leonidas, even the most evil thing in the world, right? The most tyrannical thing in the world, when it sees truth, it's kind of humbled. Right? It gets set down an echelon. So this guy in that movie, Xerxes, is literally 3 times the size of every other human being there. He's on a golden throne. He's painted. He has everything. I mean, every incense burning, anything you could think or feel or see visually that would inspire a God sense is around him. Right? And what makes that thing humble itself, even slightly, is one person being honest. Right, that's profound. And I don't know why that's coming through in the message in the figure of Xerxes, but there is something in that right? That even the figures that we villainize throughout history have lessons to teach us if we have bravery enough to have compassion for them, right? There are no villains. That is the truth. There's no real ones. By default, where they're always that. That does not exist in this world. Villains become villains, right? A matter of fact, the way villains become villains is by trying to fix the world. But they try to fix the world in a way that resonates with the way they were hurt in it, right? Which isn't true, right? The world is not created just to make you suffer. You're not that important, unfortunately, right? But as soon as we accept that victim mentality, we'll project it out as if the world is all about us and that everything that happened in the world was about our victimization, right? And we'll villainize it and we'll go and try to fix it. But when the world keeps on telling you that's not how it is, I don't feel that way, I don't agree with you, whatever, you'll just get more angry because that's an even deeper denial of what you're seeing is true. Again, it's a confusion of what's true. So you'll continually act as if it's true, as if people are denying your reality, as if you're being gaslit, all of these things. When in reality, that's what you're trying to do to the world. Every time, right? If you're attacking somebody, if you find yourself out of compulsion attacking a person, a place, a thing, or an idea in that unbalanced way, listen to the literal words you say when you attack that thing. Very specific, write them down, exactly what you said and how you tried to degrade that thing. Read it back and apply it to yourself. And you'll recognize immediately you are screaming out a description of how you were acting. Right? It's you trying to tell yourself, stop this. You know, you're going to make a villain out of something that's not really a villain. You're acting as the villain in the moment. You can see, hear, and feel that. Yet you're still telling yourself it's out there, right? I mean that. That's a really useful practice, right? If you do constantly find yourself venting out and railing at different people, places, or things, write down what you say specifically and read it back to yourself. And that'll give you a very good a good idea at least on where to look. If you're having a hard time identifying why you're acting that way, that'll give you a hint into where to look, right? So, a lot of energy today. It's very interesting. I felt this was fun for me because I felt compelled today, and that's how I'm 2:00. How I the angel number for anybody watching. Let's see what it means. I will get a little more into the comments here now, guys. I'm kind of wrapping down on what I feel guided to channel. We can look up more figures too. I was going to look up more figures, so we'll read a little bit more about Newton and these people, see if we can find anything about them in relation to alchemy. But in addition, I'll kind of open it up for a little bit of chatting too. So I'll get into some comments after I find out more about angel number 200. I could just do an intuitive read, but I feel guided to find a page. Let's see. Sure, why not? All right, so this is for anybody listening. And if you're not familiar with angel numbers, it can be a little uncomfortable to engage with first. But I promise you that it is nothing but a way to. It is nothing but a. If you're seeing numbers and synchronicities, it's just a way that the universe is trying to demonstrate to you that it is you. Right? It's trying to demonstrate to you, you forgot, but I'm talking to you all the time. I'm right here. Right? And it's one of the ways it'll do it, the most obvious way. So angel number 200, your guardian angels want you to know that they have witnessed the growth of your faith each day, and they are impressed. Angel number 200 shows that they are impressed by your efforts to stay on the right path and maintain your enthusiasm. Let's see. Your power of enthusiasm works miracles even amidst challenging moments. Thus, you need to force yourself or learn to act enthusiastically until you are bouncy and pro at it. I don't like this one very well. Anyway, you can get the message to, let's say take the number 2, I'll do it more intuitively because that's not really resonating for me at least. if you take the number 200, you can break it down by individual digits, right? So you take each individual digit, 200. 2 represents, in spirituality, and maybe I can find it here, but just think about it logically, a combination, 1 plus 1, right? So a partnership of sorts. So it could represent for you a coming together, or feeling more wholesome in partnership. But then you take the 0 and the 0, and these can represent multiple things, but in some ways they represent everything, right? The totality of everything, and kind of the end or beginning, right? So death essentially is the way I would think about it. Start and beginning in the same concept. So take 200, a double version of start and beginning, new beginnings in partnerships, right? And that can be related to whatever's relevant to you right now. It doesn't have to be just in love. More so for me, what I'm feeling right now that's coming in for you, 1-1, is it's in the spiritual sense. So everything we've been talking about today in this has been helping or guiding or showing you how you can interface with that side of yourself, the spiritual side of yourself, more readily with confidence, right? And to actually feel that it's true and real. That's because it is. The only thing that makes that feel real is you believing that it is real. That's the only thing you choose, right? So embrace that, right? Embrace the questioning, like we saw with Nietzsche. Embrace it. Honestly, the thing that makes you afraid, recognize that no fear is meant to make you feel small. Even logically, you can see this. Fear in the human being, in the mammal, is there to protect you, right? To identify what's dangerous so you don't just go and hurt yourself unintentionally. So that's a positive thing. It's you trying to keep yourself safe, right? But it can also be a limiting thing. Right, which is why there's a fight or flight response. You see it in a deer when it looks, deer in headlights look. You can also freeze in fear. Fear can paralyze you. It can motivate you or paralyze you. So it can be a protector or a destructor or a villain. You choose what it becomes by how you interface with it, right? So if you view it as something that is only there to identify what's dangerous in the world, right, and to make you freeze, then that's what it'll do, or to run away, right? Either or. If you look at it as something that's actually identifying, this is the way I think about it. Fear oftentimes represents the parts of the world that are undefined, right? So it's like looking out into the woods when it's dark. You're afraid automatically of what you don't see. Right? You hear a noise, there's something there, but you can't see it. So that unknown is what we are afraid of. In that definition of fear, it's good to walk into it instead of running away from it or freezing from it, right? Because as you start to walk into it, you'll recognize that you can see more, right? You'll find out what the sound was that you were looking at, and you'll no longer be afraid of it. This is how you quell that fear, and this is also how it guides you when you treat it properly. It expands your world, right? Maybe that sound in the woods wasn't, something trying to hurt you. Maybe it was, something beautiful. You come across a baby deer or something, right? You get an experience that you never thought was possible. Thank you, Random. I appreciate that. So this is, and this is very hard to do. This sounds very simple on the surface. Challenge your fears and walk into them. It is not. It's something you have to do for a very long time intentionally. More specifically, if you notice, and this is coming through very specifically for somebody watching right now, but if you're having dreams or you've been having a hard time sleeping, right, and you're having recurring dreams or nightmares, specific nightmares where you see specific things, those things, those villains in your nightmare, those are embodiments of this fear monster that you've created slowly throughout time by not walking into it, by not exploring the sound, right? And so you've just ignored it for a long time. But as you can tell, if you were in a horror movie and you knew that there was like somebody in your house that shouldn't be there, but you're just like, there's nobody here, slowly over time, you'd get more anxious. What's that thing doing? Is it gonna, wait, where are you? And then it'll pop up exactly when you don't want it, right? It'll inspire all of the worst fears that you've imagined up until that point. When in reality, if you go into it, and you can do this intentionally, this is why I'm speaking of it, because there's somebody here that's been having this happen in their dreams. Whatever dream it was, I've done this before. I had this happen specifically to me, so I'll explain it to you through my experience, right? And this is going to sound silly, but one of the ways that my fears manifest in my dreams and did when I was a kid, this was a continuous dream that happened for a long time, was I used to see a T-Rex, right, in my dream. Very similar to like the scene from Jurassic Park. I'm sure that's where my mind got the conception, right? But it's a combination of being chased by the T-Rex, right, and running. And I remember it would always switch. So I'd be running from the T-Rex, and it would switch from different, settings. So I'd be running through the jungle, and then I'd be in my school, and then I'd be in somewhere else, and it never stopped chasing me. The dream would always end with me kind of just waking up in the middle of the panic. And this happened not all the time, but enough to where I recognized it as a recurring dream. And it happened again, finally, not too long ago, a couple years ago. And I was reading a book on shamanism, right? And it was talking about how the dream world is more real than we like to admit, and how it, at the very least, has representations of what's real to us in the real world, and that it's important for us to engage with that and interface with it. And that anything in your dreams that shows you its teeth, right? Like that, you'll notice. A sinister smile will show you its teeth, or any predator in your dream, in general, is something that you want to be cautious of, right? Those are the things usually that have a negative intention towards you, which is why you see them that way in the dream. But they're used to you responding with, I'm afraid. That's how they've gotten bigger, right? That's how the dragon got more gold, is everybody ran away, right? And so, as soon, and I mean this, as soon as you stop that, for instance, in my example, that night, right after I had that dream, before I went to bed, told myself, I'm going to see you tonight. Whoever you are and whatever represents you that way, I'm going to see you tonight. And I prepared myself before I went to sleep for that, for a certain type of stare down with the T-Rex, right? And that's what happened. I mean it. You may sound crazy that you can assign your dream that way, but you can. You can tell your subconscious mind what you're doing when you're conscious, right? And then it'll go there to a certain degree. So anyway, that's what happened. And I had this whole very intense dream where this T-Rex, it was terrifying. Imagine a T-Rex sitting right in front of your face and just like waiting to eat you. And it does it for longer than you'd be comfortable, where you just gotta, I'm not fucking going anywhere. I'm not leaving. You know what I mean? Like in Wolf of Wall Street, I'm not fucking leaving. And I did. And I held that there. I remember it very vividly. It was terrifying. And then it left. The scene switched immediately, and me and my ex-fiance were running around, but we weren't being chased anymore by the dinosaurs. Everybody else was. So it was like, as soon as I had that confrontation, it let me go. Right? It's not that it let me go. It started to run. All the dinosaurs started to run from us as soon as I did that. And that's the hero conception that exists in everybody. That's why, it doesn't matter what specifically the symbology is to you. That same story is true. That's why we like the old Disney movies, right? That's why people are upset about the new ones. Because that story is the story that's being changed. The fundamental hero story that's true inside of everybody, that gives you a guide into how to heal yourself, how to become strong, independent, and to produce something new and real in the world. That's why those movies are so close to us. That's why our children watch them over and over again, right? They're guides. And that is why it is a travesty what has happened to most of the films throughout the last decade. Right? Regardless of what your political standing is, it's a different story being told, but we're not being told that, right? You go and see Snow White because you want to see that story of Snow White. That's not the story you get. You want to see The Little Mermaid because you want to see that story of The Little Mermaid. That's not the story you get, right? These are subtleties that you have to look for, but untruths nonetheless, right? So, dreams are very important. The symbology that comes along with the dream state has been the source of most of our creative entertainment, I think, throughout history. Genuinely, right? identifying these fundamental stories going on at the level of human being and then representing them visually. That's what most of these movies are, which is why they will inspire a lot of different feelings inside of people, right? Based on what you've experienced in the world, how you've been traumatized, all of these things. So let's see here. Thank you, Mikanush. I appreciate you. Thank you for that. In unity, absolutely. Random ordinary person. I like that. Trailblazer says, I'm mentally strong, so I can handle it, but most people are not strong enough. They don't know they're strong enough. Innately, they are. That's the only thing I would say disagree with you with on Trailblazer is they don't act that way. Most people act like they're weak things, right? That's because they believe they are. We're all very insecure, so we tell ourselves, I couldn't handle that, and we never try. But in reality, living underneath all of that is the real person, right? Everybody is a spiritual being, and they know who they are fundamentally, and they're beautiful and perfect the way they are. They're not perfect in the divine sense. They're very specifically imperfect, but that's what makes them perfect, right? And it's recognizing that gestates true strength. That true strength is a certain divinity of spirit that exists inside of people. It never goes away, no matter how lost you are. No matter how lost you are. Matter of fact, the way it is inspired is usually through feeling the weakest you've ever felt. As soon as you get to that rock bottom, that thing wakes up and says, you're strong. You just forgot. See? Right? How do you know? Because you can stand up right now. You even have the idea to. Think about the stories you've told yourself about weak people. What do they do when they're in the pit? They stay laying down. What are you asking yourself to do right now? Stand the fuck up. That's why you're strong. And you will do that over and over again. And it's not just me or you, it's everybody, right? If they recognize that truth. That's the only difference. So I love the comment, Trailblazer. I'm not trying to, disagree with you too wholeheartedly. Just that one little specific part, right? That they are strong enough. And we need to encourage people to remember that, because it's not a lie. They have to remember that they have that capacity. They're no different than Jesus on the cross. You have the capacity and the courage, if you believed in yourself enough, to allow people to murder and torture you and to not complain about it, while you did nothing but try to help them. That is the profound nature of the story of Jesus Christ and the crucifixion. That is not something that's meant to be raised onto a pedestal that we worship. He explicitly said this, right? I am you. This is what you are. Watch what I do. So be that, right? Don't let yourself feel weak unless you need to. Right? Sometimes that's what we need. Sometimes we need to fall. Sometimes we feel weak. We really need to feel how bad we have hated ourselves, how much we have told ourselves we're not worth anything. That liberates us from the conception that we have to wait for somebody out there to be punished, for some justice to come to us that God isn't delivering. No. That justice isn't here because you aren't ready for it. You don't want it. It relies on you, nobody else. The justice you want and deserve is healing and truth and the ability to be exactly who you always were supposed to be. That will never be stolen from you, but you got to remember that. They didn't take it from you. You told yourself it's not there anymore. You told yourself it's not worth enough. You told yourself I'm too scared to actually be that. Whatever version, right? So don't do that anymore, because you aren't. As soon as, and that's the thing, that's why the idea of forgiveness is built in too. There's nothing you have to go to. You don't have to go to Jesus and apologize, right? He is you. He's done the same thing, right? So just be you. You're already forgiven. There's nothing to forgive. Every transgression that you've taken against yourself and other people, I promise you, if you have transgressed against other people, you were punishing yourself. You just didn't recognize it. The reason you didn't recognize it is because of a thing called delayed gratification and karma. But I promise you, you'll recognize it as soon as that karma gets around to knocking on your door. You will not escape it. It won't let you until you remember what you are. So, if you are experiencing karma, right, negative karma, and especially if you don't know why do not try to send it back to other people. Do not try to find somebody else out there, another villain, and say they're doing this to me. Please, I truly beg of you, as you learn how powerful you are magically, because you have the ability to do things to people that you already have most likely throughout your life just by thinking negatively towards people. That's what magic is. That's what the psychic abilities are. When we feel these feelings, these powerful feelings of hate and anger, and then we think of somebody, we launch it towards them. And especially if we think of some kind of outcome we'd like, some kind of perverted justice we'd like for them, and we send that towards them, we scream at the sky. That is magic. You are asking the universe to make that happen, right? And I ask you, how often do you think that happens in today's world? How often have you done that? Because I know I did that a lot. Maybe I'm just a weird thing. Maybe I'm the only thing that screams at the sky. That could be true. I'm a little bit out there. But I don't think so. I think most of us have this side of ourselves, right? So thank you, Meganush. I appreciate you. Thank you, Tanya. Random ordinary person. I really like your name. Trying to figure out how to transmute anger to love. That's how. I kind of just unintentionally went through it, right? That's how. There's no easy way. Things that are simple often are the most difficult things you'll ever do in your life. Not the easiest, right? We like to conflate simplicity with ease. And there is some places, some areas in which that's true. Actually, matter of fact, the place that it's always true is in rationality, in logic. You know, there's this simplicity is easier. Occam's razor to a certain degree. But it's not fundamentally true because of this. Because the hardest things I've ever done have been the simplest. But they just take a lot of intent, right? So transmuting anger to love is a process of saying, that's what I want to do. And it takes a long time. You know, it's not like, hey, I just let it go and I give it up. It's, okay, I don't want to feel this way anymore. Nobody's going to do this for me. So there's some questions that automatically entails, okay, you don't want to be angry anymore, right? What are you angry at? Sometimes even asking or answering that one question can be incredibly difficult. It took me years to figure out what I was actually angry at because of how deeply I'd buried my trauma. I had told myself it was this and that and this and that and this and that. And as I went through trying to figure out, you know, you'll find out where it is when you start to feel better, right? So ask yourself that question, figure out what you're angry at, what you're bitter at. These feelings, right, that make you feel imbalanced by nature, like you're gonna explode, right? Those things are things that when you engage with those questions, they will give you truth, but it's not easy, right? So just take those truths as you discover them. You know, you'll have like little water breaks you'll recognize, oh, I'm getting somewhere. You know, it won't be all at once, but you'll get excited at the prospect that I can, you know, take a drink of water, right, and keep moving. And I'm not feeling exactly the way I did anymore. And these are all good things, right? Let me take a drink of water. Matter of fact, I keep on forgetting to. All right. Let's see here. Tanya says, I see them all the time. Yeah. Let's see here. Thank you for gifting, Random Ordinary Person. I appreciate you. Absolutely, Tanya. No worries. Random Ordinary Person says, that's hard to say. It's a long name. I'll say R-O-P, Rop. I'm going to call you Rop, if that's okay. I have had recurring childhood dreams that have a totally different meaning. I asked for answers in meditation. That's a good way to do it. Whatever you feel called to. It will come to you in odd ways that right now I couldn't tell you exactly where to look, right? Your guides, the universe is going to bring it to you right when you're ready for it, right? Those answers will, 221, those answers will come when you're ready for it, and they're going to come in pieces, right? That'll fill in exactly what those dreams were meaning or what they were supposed to represent for you as you ask those questions, as you go deeper, right? It'll come in pieces, like a puzzle. Jill J says, what are we talking about? I'm intrigued. Kind of all over the place. Jill, we started out, this is a podcast called The Unfounded Podcast. I'm recording it live here on TikTok. Obviously, this is more of the conversation section, but this has been about actually, oddly enough, alchemy and its relation to the secular world, and the way in which the secular and scientific worldviews are directly related and developed out of alchemy, so that they are spiritual practices, whether they recognize they are or not, just in a very specific way. So that's kind of the thesis and what we looked at to some degree. At the very least, most of the significant figures, figureheads of the secular world, as a matter of fact, were highly spiritual beings, at the very least alchemists. So it begs the question of how did they come to these insights? How did Tesla figure out that he could transmit electricity wirelessly? Well, if you ask him and read him, he said it came to him in a dream. Einstein's the same way. What? When I learned that let me look this up. According to Einstein, theory of relativity, I believe, came to him in a dream, when he was like kind of half on, half awake, half off. And Tesla, as a matter of fact, one of the ways that he got his insights is he had a dream journal. This is a very popular thing nowadays too, where he would wake up continuously through the nights and he would write down these ideas. That's how it would come to him. So this is, from what I can tell, not only is this something that's happened with most significant, scientific figures throughout history, this is how insight happens. It's the only way it happens, from what I can tell. There isn't any people that have logicked their way into profound insight. It doesn't exist. I can't find it. Right? There's people that have incrementally pushed the ball forward, right? There's usually what you'll see is big insight, a bunch of leeches on that insight, producing different versions, critics essentially, of that insight, that every so often you'll get one of those people that has a true one, right? But in general, most of it's throwaway. Most of it's just discourse or dialogue or opinion, right? Because all of those, and I'm not trying to be degrading, but I say leech because of the way it feeds off of the original idea. You'll notice this, even in TikTok, right? Somebody does something on a video and it starts to go viral. What do people start to do? Post the exact same thing in an attempt to get the same. It's a tendency of human beings, right? So real, true insight, when people see it, they're attracted to it like gnats, and then they try to feed off of it. Right. So I don't know what brought me to that, Jill. Interesting shift of energy when you came in the room, but that was a big channeled message there. Thanks for being here, Jill. I appreciate it. Let's see. Rob says, when that feeling comes back, and it will try to remember. Yeah, absolutely. Trailblazer says, no, I'm just talking about me. Okay, I can't remember. Was that about the trying to keep track of the conversations in my head? Apologies if I have a difficulty too. Ozzy says, thank you. You're welcome, Ozzy. Let's see here. And let's see, what do we got here? Oh, Kim. Okay. Random ordinary person is named Kim. I will refer to you as Kim from now on. Let's see here. Ozzy's. And aware of trying to be peaceful. Sugar Rose says, you look like a young Jesus. Thank you. That's very flattering. I appreciate that. I'm going to take this opportunity, like I do every time, because this happens often, usually in every lives, to point out why that happens. Because it's not like I have I'm obviously not related to the figure. But you'll notice it's in other people around the world that they may not look like the figure of Jesus, right? Or at least the way you think about him. But when you look at them, you'll think about that figure, right? Or they'll have different qualities, like long hair or whatever. Certain qualities will key you into it. And the reason why that is because what you're seeing isn't actually like a physical thing. You're seeing a spiritual reality, a unity of the person and the body and the higher being. So there's not a separation, right? Christ is truth. Right? He says this explicitly. So when experiencing Christ's energy, the only thing it is true human beings. That's it. Which is why you have the ability and you are the same thing as Christ. So I say that you will find that quality more often and more commonly in the world as people wake up, right? And it is specifically, if you're noticing that quality in somebody else, it's not there to make you feel lesser than, right? It's there to inspire that same thing in you, right? So the Christ energy, when it's seen, it's almost like the best kind of virus, right? It kind of infects. and starts to do work, even if you're not aware of that. So anyway, lots of channel messages coming through, but I always take kind of a moment when somebody says something similar to that, mentions Jesus or me looking like that, to point out why you're seeing that. It's an energetic thing, right? And it's something that everybody can experience because Christ's energy is bifurcated and it is everywhere, right? So it's not an ego thing. That's why I want to point it out, because one of the tripping points, and you'll notice this, as people wake up throughout history, you'll see a lot of people that call themselves Jesus. Matter of fact, if you go down on, Hollywood Boulevard, I bet you I can find 20 Jesuses that will tell me they're Jesus, right? How does that happen? Because this is true. It's at work. It's a universal energy. It's at work in everybody. And just the only difference is those people are actually believing they're the physical Jesus. That is not true. That is not true. You're whoever you are. So there's a differentiation, and maybe that can maybe help make sense of the world a little bit. It's people, when you see people out in the streets, homeless people that have been having a hard time, and they say crazy things, but oftentimes spiritual things. That's why it's happening, because there's a spiritual process going on there. What you're seeing is the war going on in people, right? There is a spiritual war that has been going on for a very long time inside of the human being. And you can witness that most readily when you go and walk around our cities, modern day. Watch and listen to what conversations those people are talking about, or are having, and you'll recognize they're talking to things, right? So, Diogenes says, the old man in Costco took my cart and laughed at me. He laughed at me. I don't know if that's meant to be like playful at all, but it is kind of comical. If you're serious about that, that's too bad. I'm sorry. It's an interesting, that comment's interesting. It kind of took my mind to a weird place. Just because you act nicely in the world or rightly in the world doesn't mean you're going to be treated that way. You don't get... Being a good thing does not protect you from this world. Ever. That's also one of the truths of the figure of Jesus. Right? You can see that in the figure. That's what's so terrifying about the story. You mean if I do everything perfect, exactly right, not only could I kind of still get in trouble or hurt, but like I could be the worst kind of hurt, the worst kind of misunderstood. I could have the worst thing that you could imagine happen to me still. What does that mean? Right? So there's a certain part of the world that will constantly taunt you with that reality. As you start to act more virtuously in the way that you feel is correct, you're going to find people that taunt you. What, you think that's going to protect you? It's up to you to decide what you think. But I know there is something to what you want to believe. This is one of the parts of the human being, one of the parts of the intuition of the human being that's been shut down intentionally through a couple phrases and words, ironically enough. It's as simple as that. Teaching people the phrase conspiracy theory. Teaching people the phrase coincidence, or the idea coincidence. Combining those two things together. If you think about it, every single time that you have a significant experience in your life where you start to feel a divine feeling, like, whoa, something bigger could be going on, right? As soon as you start to feel that feeling, there's an intensity, a mass to it, and it starts to grow immediately. If you're honest with yourself in those moments and you think about what you do, you most of the time crush that. And the way you'll do it is through saying it's a coincidence. Every time. You'll logic your way, like because your mind will start to play with the idea, holy shit, how did that happen? Where did this come from? And it starts to get excited, and you're like, no, it's just a coincidence. It's a coincidence. Stop doing that. Right? And you'll notice that it just starts to fizzle out and goes away. And then the magic's gone too. You don't feel good anymore. Right? Because you shut off a part of yourself that's true. That's your intuition. What you want to believe is the direction you're supposed to head. Every time, right? When you're being honest with yourself. But when we've been lied to like this, when we've been told what to believe, we don't know what that is anymore. Right? So we can actually have our belief hijacked. That's a confusing process of gaslighting, but this has been a fun podcast, guys. 232. And I think I'm kind of getting to the end of my energy here for this episode. But I want to thank everybody, and I'm going to get through the rest of the comments before I do. But real quick before I do, I want to thank everybody for being here, for listening, whenever you're listening to this or whenever you're watching it. And there'll be more on this topic, right? I'll go more into depth on this topic as well. But the world is changing. I put another video on TikTok this morning, a channeled message, and it came through really, really, really intensely. And this is a time of choice. You are a being of choice. Is something the message like we are all beings of choice. Thank you, treasures. It's good to see you too. Thank you for being here. We are beings of choice. Right? We have free will. That cannot be taken away from you. It is you. You are a leverage point, up or down, left or right. Right? So you can't take that away. There has never been, and I mean this, and I'm getting this very, like I said, intensely from my guides and whatever else is communicating to me at this time, because it feels like a lot of founders, the energy of founders, the founding fathers has been around, right? Of this time frame which the world was shifting, when it was dangerous to say what you believed, right? Is coming through really intensely as a guide, an example, our founding fathers in this country, right? Coming through to show us and to be there with us as we go through a very similar time. But I believe that this is even more difficult. And I truly believe as we look back in history, this will be redefined as a second revolution of sorts. The real individual revolution, liberal revolution, if you could call it that way, but not in a political sense, right? Where people actually become themselves, but that happens at a global scale. This is also one of the things that the Communist Manifesto took and manipulated into leveraging people into doing a very specific political thing. But there is a certain type of gestation, a consciousness at the human level, right? That once we all start to believe something, once that gets over like 50%, that becomes the norm, that becomes the reality, right? So it has never been more critical. The future of the human race rests on you saying what is true. And I mean that. It could all end based on you or me telling one lie. It doesn't seem real when I say it at this level, but apply that concept to Putin. Apply that concept to Biden and every other figure around throughout the world. You'll recognize that truth has never been more important, right? And that is what we teeter on right here. And that has never been the case. Not as overtly as it is now. Every other time in history, we've been able to lie to ourselves and continue the narrative that there was a right and a wrong in what's going on right now, that there's a good and a bad, that we can justify the war, the hatred, the bitterness, all of this negativity, but that is no longer the case. You can try to justify what's going on in this world right now, but you will degrade yourself in the process as you do that, because it isn't true. The world as it exists now is not justified. But it's going to become that, and we're going to make it that. I believe that. I hope you believe that too. So I'll leave that there. I'll finish up these comments and we'll call it a day. Sugar says Diogenes, or is it Diogenes? So sorry, I would have give you my card. Sorry, I'm kind of confused on the comment. Let's see. It is to be written by our own hand. Yes. It has to be written by our own hand. Exactly. We like to, when we think about like the founding fathers, these people that made these crazy advances in history, that they were somehow, we raise them on a pedestal as if they were somehow almost divine figures themselves. And they were, right? But the way they became that was not through some kind of, you're special from the beginning. No, they made the choices, the fundamental choices that other people did not want to make because they were afraid. they valued, and at least as much as they could in the time frame with their understanding of the world, raised truth above whatever else. And that's true. Right? So as long as a country does that, a state does that, a people does that, they're gonna be okay. They walk with God, right? They're aligned with the world. And that's why there is no favorites, which is also why the United States right now, and I say this as an American, as a veteran, as somebody that's very proud to live in this country, but the United States needs to figure its shit out because it's not telling the fucking truth. And that means we have strayed from a path that we don't want to stray off of, especially as we're banging our shields at every fucking person in the entire world saying, bring it on, motherfuckers. You really think we're going to be able to justify that? You really think whatever's watching over us is going to be like, yeah, they're righteous? We'll begin our own demise because we're no longer true. That's not a future I want. I don't think that's a future that any American or any person around the world wants, honestly, because America is not just important to Americans. It is a representation of the path forward for the world. Freedom. Everywhere. Uniformly. Without question. That is what is coming. It doesn't matter where you live, what country you live in, or how much power you have in that country, what rules you followed up until that point, or what lies you told yourself. That is the future that is coming. And it's coming for you. Every leader in the world. This is Judgment Day. This is the time frame when the cats come a-calling. And this is partially why I say this message. Make sure you're speaking truth. If you want to see what happens to people that don't speak truth, just read a history book and find the villains. So, let's see. So, is it Diogenes? Is that Diogenes? I'm trying to pronounce the word, but I keep on wanting to saying Diogenes. So how would you explore works in terms of being transformative? Could incremental change not also come about the same way? Let's see. Incremental. Absolutely. I think if I understand the question right, Diogenes, that both happen. There's two levels. It's a process happening at the individual level and also at the grand level too. You know, you could think of it in terms of like evolution, but the evolutionary concept applied with a spiritual tint, right? Spiritually, we're all being demanded to eliminate what isn't relevant, what doesn't help us, what doesn't kind of expand the greater being. And so in this way, we can have kind of incremental changes or even backward steps as we try to understand the change that we're implementing, right? This is actually more often than not what happens. You hear this in the old quote, I forget who says it, one of the Greek philosophers or Roman, I believe, but it's something like, good times produce weak men produce bad times produce strong men, and strong men produce good times, right? This cycle. So often what happens is a good idea is produced, both individually and at the grand, and then it's filtered up to the grand level, and then we try to test it at the grand level, right? So we'll implement that good idea. And if it is true, it'll produce better conditions for the world. But in those better conditions, the lesson, the experience that was used to create that is lost in the generation that experiences the benefit. So then it produces a weak type of human being in a very specific way. It's more of an intellectual way, so that they can't see the world fully, which then they operate off of non-truths and create a more degraded version of the world, which then they have offspring in, and those people, you know, come up in that world where there is more untruth, and they learn to value truth more, so then they go say it and they create another advancement. So there's this back and forth, and this happens everywhere throughout history, right? And we're in the middle of that right now, right? We're in one of those pullback times before the explosion, the renaissance of free thinking, right? Right after constriction is an expansion, right? It's a waveform, up and down, up and down, up and down. And this is everything. This is scientifically true. This is also true socially and politically. So I hope I answered the question properly. It's happening like that at everybody, at every level. So there's incremental change. There's also change that looks like it's reverting, you know? It's always incremental like that, I guess is what I mean to say. So, But there is also, and maybe this is a deeper part of it, a point of no return in that, where truth, and I believe this, when it becomes enunciated enough, it becomes nearly impossible to not say, because like you can see this is true with lies. As a lie becomes more prevalent in the world, the bandwagon effect takes effect. So you want to say the lie. Why wouldn't that be true with something that's also true? Thank you very much, Random. I appreciate you. Why wouldn't that also be true with somebody that's telling the truth? And I think it is. It's just something we haven't applied in that way yet. But we can see has been demonstrated through all of the figures throughout history that brought that kind of truth, that we raise up as heroes, right? So, wow, thank you for that question. A lot of energy came through with that. Thank you very much for that question, Diogenes. Appreciate it. And apologies if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Thank you for the follow, Sugar Rose. Appreciate you. Tanya says, you are divine masculine. Thank you. Appreciate that. There's a balance that's necessary. I recognize that I am in more of a divine masculine right now with what I'm doing. But there's I'm sure you're aware of this. There's a balance that's necessary. My journey has not been a journey of realizing my divine masculine more. It's been a journey of realizing my divine feminine more, because my divine feminine was what I blocked out and denied, which is what produced a very unbalanced masculine side of me for many years, which is also a process what I think's happened to most men in the world. And we've incorrectly blamed them for acting like assholes in the manly sense. But the reason they're acting that way is they were never taught that they can be anything else than that there is a soft side to them too, and they're allowed to be that. So when you don't kind of gestate that part of yourself, there's nothing else you can become besides what we've seen masculinity act like over however long it's acted, right? So this is a growth that's happening inside of men and women, right? In a mirrored way, I believe that women are going through opposite problem, where they're experiencing kind of and you can see this in the world, but the divine feminine has a much different way of manifesting when it's unbalanced, and it's less overt. The thing that the tendency and the quality of the divine feminine that you'll notice when it's out of balance, it likes to hide. Essentially the way I can describe the divine feminine when it's out of balance is it'll pretend it's not even there while it's trying to do things, right? If it's bitter or resentful or whatever it is. And this is what I went through, right? I pretended like I was a good, nice thing while I was sitting here with all of this bitter anger, resentment inside of me, looking at the world like it's a place that, it deserved to pay me something for what I've gone through. Right, so there's this quality as well on the feminine side that's coming up because of the way we've misunderstood the masculine problems and played a blame game and tried to define half of the world as the problem. We do this all over and over again, whether it's race or sex or your nationality or wherever the fuck you came from. We just go down the list and find the next quality that we want to try to define as the fundamental one. It's retarded, excuse me for that frame, but that's the best way I could describe it. It's literally a lesser way of viewing the world. But I don't mean any offense when I say that. So there's certain words, and I mean that too. Thank you, whoever made me say that. Because I wouldn't have said that word if this point wasn't going to come through. Language, especially language, is something that we will self-censor in the way I just tried to do with you, right? Because I don't want you to think something about me, assume something about me, because I said a word that people have labeled as hurtful, right? And that may be true, but what we fail to recognize in that is the reason the word is hurtful is how it was used. The intent behind the word, right? Which is why you can reclaim the word, why many cultures have reclaimed those words that have been used as hate. Because the power behind the word is in the intent, and that's true with every word. Right? There's no fundamental definition that you automatically mean when you say something. That doesn't exist, right? So, that being said, I apologized for saying that word, right? Because I wanted to make sure that there was nobody that would take offense to it. But I'm not sorry for using a word that accurately described what I was seeing, right? And that's something that I think needs to be said too. Like, don't apologize for what you say if it's actually true in what you feel. The best way to describe what I'm saying, right? Why would I filter that? This is true, and this is a big debate going on right now. It's one of the fundamentals of free speech. You can't ask for people to give you the freedom to talk if you won't even allow yourself the same freedom, if you won't give yourself the right to say what you want to say, right? I'm censoring myself there. There's nobody outside me doing that. I'm doing that because I feel like I'm going to be viewed in some way, like I'm going to be judged in some way. That may be true and that may not be true, but I'll never know that if I censor myself, right? So while we can focus on all of these people in the world right now that are trying... And he gets censored anyway. Hey guys, it's me from a couple of days after this was recorded, doing some editing. And I wanted to jump on here and kind of make a comment after I've had some time to process. As you can hear me processing live, the fact that I just got censored, I'll let you be the judge on whether you think that was warranted or not. At least in my opinion, the kind of content that I produce is very intentionally produced to help people, right? To be there with people when they're going through hard times and to provide somewhat of a map of sorts so that you can navigate this world that is so full of untruths. And I find it just, at least my own opinion, very ironic to have that kind of conversation censored. Anyway, this is the statement I made right after. I want to thank you for being here, and I'll be back soon. Hello, anybody that was on the live episode that I was just recording, but I just, in the middle of that episode, got censored. And the reason I got censored was for saying a very specific word. And as I was talking about why it's important to have free speech in this world, in this country, and how prevalent it is that people are being censored for using even simple words, explaining why that isn't true, my live feed was cut off by TikTok, demonstrating, exemplifying exactly what I'm talking about. So TikTok, if you're watching this, I have many different versions of what I just recorded and many different platforms that I can share it on, which I will be doing, especially the ones like Rumble that won't do this to people. So this video and every other part of this podcast that is being recorded right now will be broadcast in every fucking direction I can figure out how to. And this is what you will get back every time you try to restrict free speech in this country. Anybody else that has been censored in this way, that has been controlled in this way, it is time to stand up, speak up, share it, push it out. Because this is not true. This world is a lie. The people doing this know it is, and I promise you, look at me. Karma is real. Believe that. Good luck. So, as you guys can hear, I got really worked up there. But rightfully so. It's important not to hide that, right? There's things that are happening in this world, and I'll leave you guys with this, that are so incredibly frustrating and unenunciated. There's ways that people are suffering, ways you are suffering, that aren't even being recognized. The things you can't talk about. And that's the part of this world that I think deserves to have a light shined on it. The parts of the world that would try to encourage that would try to keep untruth circulating, that would try to push down honest rhetoric, genuine empathy for other people, and a desire to make something worthwhile in the world. As I said before, I'll let you be the judge on whether you believe the content that I create is something that needs to be censored. The funny thing is, people have that choice already. People have the choice everywhere they are, by default, by nature, to listen or not listen to what somebody says. This is the fundamental reason why we don't need anything else besides the rights that the Constitution outlines. Because any other restriction of freedom is simply a restriction of each individual's choice, their own freedom to choose what they want to consume, whether that's food or ideas. So, what's becoming more apparent and what is more important as we move forward for each of us to recognize is that the process of telling truth is a very scary one. A matter of fact, it's one that will lead you down a lonely road in this world, and that you have to truly know, if you are listening to this right now, that you are strong enough, that your individuality will carry you through, and that if you believe in what you're saying, nobody, and I mean nobody, has the right to tell you you shouldn't say it. So say it louder than you've ever said it before. And with that, that's the Unfounded Podcast, guys. Lots of love. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.